Hey everyone, welcome back to another Link to Linguistics. Today we are discussing phonemes, and that is because when it comes to voice design, there's one foundational linguistic concept that has never let me down, and that is phonemes. So, this is a very simplified explanation of what a phoneme is, but you can basically think of them as the smallest, most discrete, fundamental sounds that any human speech can be made of. So, ah is a phoneme, l, I, u is a phoneme, but it's not an English phoneme, it's a French phoneme. So basically a phoneme is the smallest unit of speech that distinguishes words from each other. We know that the phonemes v and f in English are different phonemes because the words fine and vine mean two different things. If they didn't, f and v would not carry any different meaning for English speakers. But v and f sound much more similar to each other than like f and l. And one of the reasons for that is because v and f are pronounced with the exact same configuration of lips, teeth, and tongue. And pretty much the only difference between them is that you vibrate your vocal cords when you say v and you don't when you say f. Go on, try it. Try switching between v and f and see if anything changes other than just the vibration of your vocal cords. So with f and l, your tongue is in a completely different spot. So it's easier to tell those two different phonemes apart. And normally this doesn't matter too much because usually there's enough context around any given phoneme with the entire word and the phrase that that word is in and the context of the entire situation. But sometimes when the context is a little bit ambiguous, that's when it can get hard to understand what somebody meant when they say a word that could be confused with a different word. So you might need to check with them and see if they actually said what you thought they said. And we've all heard about vowels and consonants, and each of those have very unique properties. All vowels are very robust sounds. They vibrate your vocal cords. All vowels vibrate your vocal cords. And they can be heard from like a mile away. Ah, oo, ee. Consonants, on the other hand, can kind of go either way. Some consonants are pretty robust, and they do vibrate your vocal cords, like but some are short and quiet, like k. I'm not even sure if you guys can hear that. K, as in cat. Some are long and quiet, like f. Some are short and loud, like g. So where this all gets a bit hairy is when you try to document phonemes, when you take spoken language and turn it into written language. Because in most languages, the ratio of phonemes to letters in the writing system is not 1-to-1. I mean, think about English. How many phonemes are in the word laugh? L, a. But when you write it down, you've got 5 letters to represent 3 sounds? What the? Some languages have nearly a 1-to-1 ratio of sounds to symbols in their writing system, like Spanish. Perfecto, me gusta, but there are still exceptions like porque. So, how do linguists represent spoken language on paper when our writing systems are so far off from the real thing? We, linguists, use a wonderful system called the International Phonetic Alphabet, or the IPA. And the IPA includes every single sound that a human vocal tract and articulatory system can actually produce. It's standardized across all languages, and it is literally just a 1-to-1 ratio of sound to symbol. So using the IPA, you can transcribe speech into writing across any language and just using one symbol for every sound that you want to represent. Another really important thing about speech is that there are no spaces when you speak, unless you speak really slow and pause between each one, but no one does that. Normally phrases just blend together, and our brains are incredibly good at deciphering this string of sounds that just comes out of us. It would be a lot harder to understand writing that was just a big string of letters, although that has happened before in the past, in certain eras. And, fun fact, Linguists who do discourse analysis, or conversation analysis, depending on whose turf you hang out on, actually have an entire transcription system that we use to reflect speech. So you can see arrows here pointing up to indicate an upward inflection, and you can see arrows pointing down to indicate a downward inflection. And you see underlining for stress and all kinds of other symbols that help us to listen to recordings and then write down exactly what we're hearing. And even though we don't actually use IPA in this practice, although I do think some die-hard linguists do that, even knowing this system exists can be useful when you're thinking about voices. If you're trying to manipulate Alexa's voice or inflection, or change the way that she's pronouncing a particular phoneme, just knowing that written language and speech, and knowing that there are entire systems that already exist to help us mark up and write down speech is really helpful too. It's like, why would we reinvent the wheel when linguists have already invented the wheel? As a voice designer, phonemes are your currency. The phonemes you choose for Alexa's response back to a user need to be designed thoughtfully. And it's not just the words you're designing, it's the literal phonemes. Because in voice-first interactions, we don't have anything written to support the user. Everything is done in real time, so there's a very small margin for error, and we already know what happens when that error happens. We discussed face work and politeness and all that fun stuff in past episodes. Phonemes can be tricky. Sometimes it's difficult for our ears to differentiate between phonemes. And sometimes it's hard for Alexa to differentiate between phonemes. So as a voice designer, you can leverage your knowledge of phonemes and design your prompts in a way that avoids phonemic ambiguity. Instead of asking the user, would you like a hat or a cat, you might just want to have her ask, do you want a kitten or a hat? That way, the two possible answers are much more phonetically different from each other. And if you're trying to manipulate Alexa's voice or inflection, or change the way she's pronouncing a particular phoneme to make it even more clear to whoever's listening, you could use SSML, or Speech Synthesis Markup Language, to actually change and manipulate her speech. You can even use SSML to write out words in IPA to have fine-grained control on how she's pronouncing something. Fun fact, probably one of the main reasons Alexa's name was chosen is because its uniquely varied phonemic structure. The word Alexa doesn't get mixed up with many other words in the English language, and that helps decrease the chances of Alexa perking up when the user wasn't intending to summon her in the first place. Imagine if her name was something like Bob. It would get falsely triggered every time you say lob, sob, corn on the cob. So Alexa just has a very nice variations of vowels and consonants, very robust sounds, 3 syllables, and hard to get mixed up with other words. So that's the basics of phonemes and how it relates to conversation design. And I'd love to hear examples of how phonemes have helped you as a voice designer.